Oh my gosh, it's happening. We are doing it. We are finally, well, I am finally doing a French pronunciation video for singers. So exciting. I've wanted to do this for so long, but then COVID, and I was like, COVID's so hard. This is not spoken French, okay? This is sung French. This is classically sung French. So that means that you are going to be trying to layer over the top of your pronunciations a consistent resonance. And that's going to slightly change some of the things that maybe you would do in spoken French. Just a little bit, not a ton, okay? Let's not get crazy. But it is going to change them just a little bit. There are a few rules that you need to know about, a few key exception words that you are going to need to know because they're used all the time, and you'll have to know what they are if you're going to be a competent singer, okay? So if you're not there yet, it's the reason you're watching this video. If you're not there yet, it's okay. It's all right. That's why you're watching this video and why you will always be able to come back and refer to it whenever you need. I'm going to be using a lot of IPA in this video. You don't necessarily have to know what IPA is. It's the International Phonetic Alphabet. It's when we take symbols and use them to represent specific sounds across languages. So the typeface A, the one with the tail at the top, I'll put it here. The typeface A is something that we use to describe the sound ah, not ah, with a little bit of a darker placement, not ah. That's when we use the rounded A. Typeface A is this kind of blanket of a little bit of twang over the top, just a little bit, so that we get ah, like la, instead of la. You see the difference? It's not O, but it's got kind of this roundness to it. It's a way of describing what kinds of frequencies we're going to bring into the coloring of a vowel. And those symbols don't change no matter what language you're studying. The IPA stays the same. It's the reason it was invented. All right. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about vowels. This is going to be like your appendix so that you know what I'm talking about. We're talking about vowels. We're talking about A, E, I, O, and U, and how you pronounce those within the word. They're going to be really obvious things like how A is ah, like doi, okay? We're going to talk about nasal sounds next, which is this like the staple of the French sound is when you put stuff in your nose. We do it too, you know? I mean, think of the word can't. If you want to know if you put that in your nose or not, plug your nose and it'll go, wah. It'll get that kind of bright, nosy sound. Say the word can't. Can't. I definitely put it in my nose. So I do a nasal. We just don't IPA it that way in English IPA, but I do put it in my nose. I can do it. Can't. Can't. Suddenly I'm very, very fine and very proper. But that's not what we're doing. I say can't. That's a part of my language, okay? Okay, so we're gonna do on, and All right. Those are the four nasals that we're going to deal with. And then we're going to move on and talk about a schwa, which is like a non-vowel. It's basically you do nothing with your mouth and you just grunt. It's kind of a non-vowel. So we'll talk about schwas. Then we're going to talk about ENT endings, because I know y'all are like, if you have any amount of exposure to French, you will know that ENT endings are like, do I have to look every single one of these up? If you don't speak French, the answer is yes. Okay, then we're going to move on to accent marks. We're going to talk about accent aigu. We're going to talk about the accent grave. We're going to talk about the accent circonflexe. We're going to talk about the cédille, the diaresis, which is different than the German umlaut, okay? They are two separate things. We'll talk about it. We're going to talk about vowel combinations when they're not followed by an N, because that's different. So N's are not part of it. In my diction classes, that's what always trips students up. They always pronounce it nasal or they change the rule. And I'm like, why are you doing that? There's no N. If there is an N, then it will go nasal, but there is no N. And if there's a double N, it won't. But we'll get to that. Okay, so we're going to talk about vowel combinations. We're going to start with AI and EI. We're going to go to AU, EAU. I promise it's not as complicated as it seemed. I promise. Just hang with me. You'll get to it and be like, oh. Easy. We're going to talk about EU, OEU, then we're going to talk about OI, which is a wa sound. We're going to talk about OU, which is just an oo sound. We're going to talk about OU when it's in the initial part of the word, meaning when it starts a word, it's more of a w sound instead of a oo sound. Like we, which means yes. Okay, so then we're going to talk about UI, which is like ni. And that's a little bit different. Okay, and then we're going to move on to French word endings. When do we say them? When do we not? If there's a consonant at the end, do we say it? Do we not say it? Do we say the S? Do we say the T? What are we doing? We're gonna go over that and give you a really simple formula that works 80% of the time, okay? Which is enough. All right, now we're gonna move on to consonants. We're gonna start with F, S, and W. Then we're gonna go to P, T, C, and Q. And then we're gonna move on to G, J, L, which includes things like AIL, AILL, like tie, and things like that. And then we're gonna go to R, and then we're gonna go to X. And then we're gonna move on to consonant combinations like CH, PH, TH, GN. When do we do those? Etc. And then we're going to talk about, at the very end, we're going to talk about exceptions like bien. We're going to talk about bonheur. We're going to talk about when to pronounce the double L's, when not to. And the little trick is that little saying that says a million tranquil villages. That'll help you remember when to say the L's, when not to say the L's. We're also going to briefly touch on elisions and linking and what that means for how you pronounce things. It's just super simple, you guys. I promise as soon as you hear these, as soon as you get the habit of these in your head, you'll be like, oh, it's like a puzzle. Like, I'm not afraid of this anymore. I can look at it and I can decipher what I see and I get it. I see French as the issue with more students than any other language. French is always the one that makes your brain twist a little bit more intensely. You have to like pause for a second and go, okay, what's the rule of this and what do I have to do with my mouth? So that's what we're gonna go over. Let's start with vowels. All right, let's start with A. So every single vowel has two different ways of pronouncing it when you speak it. However, because this is sung French, I'm gonna stick with the typeface A, which brings you into a little bit of a brighter position. So I'm not gonna worry about doing the rounded A with the line on the side. I'm gonna stick with typeface A, and that will indicate that we're doing a brighter pronunciation. So for the purposes of singing, A has one pronunciation in the Emily method, which is that it's just going to be ah. So the first word we're going to experiment with is the word ma, which means my. Okay? So you have M, typeface A, and all you're going to say is ma. Give it a try. Ma. Not ma. Ma. So bring the tongue forward just a little bit more. Ma. Okay, let's move on to E. E has three pronunciations. When you see E by itself, you're typically going to see it with an accent aigu over the top, which is when the top of the tail falls to the right. Okay, and that's going to indicate that you close the sound, meaning that you don't let there be as much space in your mouth. So think about it like your tongue is here, the roof of your mouth is here, your tongue is here, and when you bring your tongue super high up in your mouth, that's an E sound. So say E and recognize how your tongue rises and it closes off that resonant space. So you get all of the really high frequencies that can actually live there. So when you flex your tongue and bring it all the way up to the roof of your mouth, you get a very bright, pinny kind of sound, which is what an E is. This is an E, this is an A. A. So whenever you see that tail that's tipped to the right, I don't know if this is right in your angle, but the top of it tips to the right. Okay, so it falls toward the rest of the word, falls forward in the way that you, like the direction you read, and you're gonna close that sound to an A. Now it's not E, and it's not eh, and it's not our American A, because we have a diphthong there. We start more open and then we close. A. We don't do that. It's not A and it's not E, it's E. E. Okay, so it's a little bit brighter, but it's one shape. It's one position in your mouth. Hold that position and keep it so that you don't do a weird diphthong like that little glide at the end. A. We're not going to do that. A. A. Hold the position. Don't move it. Just vibrate your vocal folds through the position. A. The next one is when you have it's at the final part of a word. So you have a word that ends with ER, ED, or EZ, okay? So a word like trouver. Now I'm gonna pronounce them like you're singing them. If you were to speak it, it would be trouver. I know that. I'm gonna pronounce it like you'd sing it. So we're gonna say trouver. The ER there indicates that you do a closed E. Trouver. Oops. Trouver. The next one is something like pied. P-I-E-D, which I think it means foot, doesn't it? Pied. So you're going to get this kind of glide into the A on pied. The next one is A-L-L-E-Z, which is aller, or to go. Like if people are like, aller, aller, it means go, go, go. So you get this kind of A sound. Aller, aller, aller. Not aller, aller, aller. Can you hear how it's different? Don't say it like you're an American. Aller, aller, aller. You're just going to take it right to that position and hold it and then vibrate through. Aller, aller, aller. The next group of words that you're going to do a closed E in is one syllable words ending in ES. So things like LES, which means the, DES means of the or some, and then you're going to look at MES, which means my, TES, which means your. So we're going to look at something like that. You see this all the time, you guys, because the is literally before everything. So if you look at LES, you're going to see it all over the place. And I have a little bit of a different opinion about this because resonances change depending on what follows it. So let's set the rule and then I'll talk about that for a second. So LES, les, I do close that. Les, des, mes, te. So we're going to do les, but if I had a word that opened up after it, like en is a very open sound, it's easy to kind of get a color of openness, like les enfants, les enfants. It just depends, okay? So make sure when you talk to your coach about it, I would default to les, not lay. Did I just do lay? No, don't do lay. Do les enfants. Just close that sucker up unless somebody tells you not to, okay? Which is entirely possible. Just stay flexible. Stay flexible, but sure. The next pronunciation of E is going to be an open E, meaning you bring the tongue down a little bit more so you get more of those darker colors. So we get the sound and it looks like this in IPA. It's called an epsilon or epsilon. You're going to do an epsilon here, and it means to open it up a little bit. So it's going to be like the word bed or head. It's a little bit more open, but the tongue is still very forward. So you get words like prêt. Prêt. Sorry, I keep doing that. I will pronounce it like you sing it. Prêt. So P-R-E-S, but the E, if you notice, has the top of the accent going the opposite direction from the aigu that we already talked about. So that means when the accent falls backwards in the opposite direction you read, it's going to be an accent grave. So it's going to open it up a little bit. So you get prêt instead of prêt. So give that a try. Try saying the word prêt. Prêt. And don't be afraid to roll that R. Prêt. Try très. Très, which means very, right? Très facile, très facile. It's very easy. The other instance that you would pronounce an E open, like prêt, is if it has a circumflex accent over the top. So a word like prêt, and you're like, but that sounds exactly like P-R-E accents grave S. I know, it's French. It's so frustrating. If you have a circumflex over the top of the E, it opens it up, okay? So a word like prêt, or like what's that restaurant in New York? Prêt à manger. Prêt à manger. That's where you would do that. So you're going to open up that E so that it's not prêt, but it's prêt. And another word would be like rêve. Try saying that one. Instead of rêve or rêve, it's rêve. Rêve. Again, if you're not sure where that's supposed to fall, say the word head or bed and try and scoot that in. So you get rêve, head, rêve. The other time you would pronounce E as an open E is when it occurs in a syllable ending in a pronounced consonant. So if you get a word like avec, which means with, avec moi, then you would use e. So you see that E in avec comes just before a pronounced consonant at the end of the word. So it has to be at the end and it has to be pronounced. If it's not pronounced, then you get things like the easy we already talked about, which is closed, like aller, aller. If it were pronounced, let's pretend like it's pronounced, even though it never is. This is not a French word. It would be à l'aise, à l'aise. It would open it right up. But because you don't pronounce it, it's closed. So we're talking about the word avec. So here we have an A. We already know how to do the A's. Avec, avec. That's not just at the end of words. This is if you have a syllable ending in a pronounced consonant. Okay, so if like a word that is multisyllabic, like español, it's going to be an open E because that's one syllable. Español. So S instead of es or us. Español. All right, let's get to the schwas. Is the schwa next? We were going to do nasal vowels, but I am going to do the schwa right now, but just to give you a little bit of a taster, okay? So you do a schwa, which is kind of a non-vowel. You just kind of vibrate through your mouth when everything is at rest, like the. So we're going to do the same thing. You're going to do a schwa in one syllable words ending in E. So the word like le, which means the or him or it. You're going to do it in a word m, which is me or to me. You're going to do it in t and s. So le, practice with me, le. Le. I mean, try and make it as non-vowel as you can, because it can shift into something else so easily if we're not really insistent that it's le. We don't have flex anywhere. Don't flex your tongue, don't flex your lips. Le, s, m, t. Easy. You got it. We also do the schwa at the end of syllables that are not word finals. So a word like devoir, devoir, which means should or must. So devoir, you get de, voir. I also noticed, I like to think of it a little differently. Now this doesn't always work, but 95% of the time it does. If I have an E in between two consonants, so devoir has D-E-V. You've got those two consonants bracketing that E. I have noticed a consistent pattern that you don't really read in any of these diction books, that if it's in between two consonants, it's usually a schwa. Barring any of these open-closed rules that exist for closed E and open E, it's usually a schwa if it's in between those two and it's in the middle of a word. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So let's practice with that one a little bit because I know people struggle with it. So we're going to say devoir, not devoir or devoir, devoir. The next word we're going to do is avenue. Avenue. Now don't worry about the end. We'll talk about U's and how to pronounce them in the mouth. We're just going to worry about that E. We already know what the A does. See, you already know so much. You're basically French. Avenue. Avenue. Okay, finally we're going to talk about when you see an E and it's actually silent in its pronunciation. The silent or unpronounced E occurs as unaccented E at the end of words of more than one syllable. So it's not as complicated as it seems, I promise. If you see an E that follows a consonant, it's usually a schwa. Okay? Like, let's simplify this so that it's not like, oh, we have to use our academic language. Like, let's just simplify this. So a word like facile, you get this little what I call shadow vowel because it's almost like you forgot to stop vibrating your vocal folds when you stopped the word. When you said the L, you forgot to stop your voice after the L was done. So instead of facile, where I stop vibrating as soon as the L is done, you get facile. It's like this little teeny shadow. You get it in Italian a lot, right? Facile. The next one is quel. Quel. You get this little at the end. Capitale. Capitale. You get these little things at the end. Now listen, I'm saying it how you would sing it. Remember that. You would not say in French, facile, facile. They wouldn't do that. They would say très facile. Do you hear any shadow vowel? No. It wouldn't be like très facile, très difficile. Like they wouldn't do that. It's très facile, très difficile. However, when we sing it, we usually have notes that are attached to that which means we have to pick a vowel for them, right? So we're gonna do a schwa. So you're gonna say facile. Let's pretend like I just put that into a song. Facile, whatever. Then you go on. So you're gonna have to put the schwa at the end. So don't get confused when you see that in French pronunciation in a dictionary where they don't have it IPA'd out and you're like, why isn't it there? Because they're showing you how they say it, not how it's sung. But we're talking about sung pronunciation. So here you're gonna get that schwa. The other time you're gonna pronounce E as a schwa is if it's at the very end of a word, and it pluralizes that word. So if I'm going to take facile again, and if you were to pluralize that, or make it more than one, so you put an S at the end of the word, you're going to have to do a schwa. So you'll have facile, and you would actually say the schwa in that instance, so that they know you're talking about the plural form of that word in your speech rather than the singular form. So there's a difference between facile and facile. Okay, the meanings are different, and it is important that you pay attention to that. You have to be specific, otherwise you'll say a completely different word. So if you're looking at a word like facile, quel, we're just going to pluralize everything that we said before. Capitale, it's going to say capitals or cities, which or what. I mean, it changes just slightly what you're doing. All right. Okay, let's talk about ENT endings. All right. This is something that you're going to bump heads into. Unless you speak French, you're not going to know whether or not to do a schwa in sung French or to do an A nasal. You're just not going to know. Because unless you can recognize when the word is a third person, plural, present verb ending, you're not going to know whether or not to do it, okay? So one of those is a schwa, and sometimes it's an A nasal sound, all right? So a word like trouve, or the way that you would sing it, trouve, that has an ENT ending, but it is a schwa because it is a third person plural present verb ending. Okay, you wouldn't know that. You just have to look them up. Okay, so from here on out, when you're like, I see an ENT, there's a rule, I know there is. There isn't a rule that you'll be able to just be like, oh, that's the rule, and now I know forevermore how to pronounce ENT endings. You don't. You have to look them up. Okay, unless you speak French and you can make that recognition, you have to look every single one up. And if you are a competent musician, you will look them up, or you will refer to someone who's a native French speaker or a native French singer who sings that piece and says it that way. But you're going to want to refer to more than one resource so that you're sure you're pronouncing that ending correctly. So ENT endings from here on out, just look every single one up. Okay, we're moving on to E. Finally, how wonderful. E is going to be pronounced basically like the vowel you see in English. So it'll be E. It's the same in Italian. If you see a lowercase I, you're going to say E every single time. So a word like difficile, which means difficult, all of those E's are going to be E. Nothing's going to change about them. Please don't do a capital I, which is an I. Difficile, please don't. Please don't do that. Make the commitment to close the space in the mouth to E. Difficile. Difficile. Say it with me. Difficile. Ici, which means here. Ici. Ici, like the word ici-bas. You guys know that song. Ici-bas, tous les lilas meurent. Like, you know that song. Ici-bas. It's not ici or issa. It's ici. The other pronunciation of E is when you see Y beginning words. It's mainly in proper nouns that you're going to see that. So a word like Ypres, which is, I believe, a city in Belgium. Ypres. And then you're going to get Nancy. Nancy. So you're going to have an E sound for those Y's, okay? When you see Y in French, you're going to pronounce it as an E. The next one, when the French letter I is followed by another pronounced vowel, it's pronounced like the Y of the English yes. So a word like official, which we would look at and be like, oh, that's official. Nein, das ist nicht. Oh, this isn't German. No, it's not. Officiel. Officiel. Okay? Remember that E opens up to because the L is pronounced at the end. Remember? Officiel. Officiel. So you're going to get that little J glide because it's followed by a vowel that's pronounced. Okay? So, officiel. There you go. All right, moving on to O. O has two ways of pronouncing it. You can do open O, which is just an ah with lips around it, or you can do closed O, okay? Which is like putting lips around, just put a marble in your mouth, okay? So I'll show you what I mean. So if you've got an open O, you're gonna do ah, like a dark ah, and then you're gonna put lips. Oh, oh. Like, alors, like A-L-O-R-S. Alors. Lots of lips. If your lips are not out, you're doing an ah. So you keep those lips out so it doesn't go alors, alors, alors. It has to be out. Okay? When I talk about a closed O, like bientôt, bientôt, we're gonna act as if we have a marble in our mouth or something like this size. This is one of my erasers. Just put something like that in your mouth so that the tongue will dip in the middle so you get some of those darker colors, but then we're going to bring a brightness to it as well by shaping the lips a little more closed. So we're going to have bientôt, bientôt. Instead of bientôt, that would be open, bientôt, which is an ah with lips. Okay, so now you know the difference between open O and closed O. Now what I have found is that sometimes the explanations in pronouncing dictionaries are a little confusing. They're like, this usually occurs in a syllable ending in a consonant. And it's like, can we just not talk about syllables for a second? There's an easier way to talk about this. If the O is followed by two consonants, it's like a gate. You open it up so you can go through, okay? So mort, M-O-R-T, has two consonants that follow. It doesn't mean you pronounce them all, but it's followed by two consonants. So you're gonna open that up like a gateway. So mort, or alors, or bonne, bonne. It's not nasal, bon, it's bonne. If it's followed by two consonants, that's all you need to remember. Don't think about syllables. If it's followed by two consonants, that rule is pretty consistent. Let's talk about closed O's. You pronounce it like the O of the English no, without the w. No, 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 we're not going to do that. But without the off glide, so there's none of that w thing that happens. It's just going to be no. So when it is written as a circumflex O with a little circumflex over the top, remember we talked about that? You are going to close that baby up. So the word C-O with the circumflex, T-E, côte, côte, you're going to close it. Again, like bientôt, bientôt, the O has a circumflex, like notre or notre, you're gonna have to roll it. All of those are gonna have closed O's. The next one is when it comes before a Z sound. So often S, when it's got two vowels on either side of it, often S is pronounced like a Z. So the word like rose is gonna be rose. So when it comes before a Z sound, rose. But just like with the open O, I said there were two consonants that open it up just to simplify the rule. We're going to use the same thing with the closed O. If it's followed by one consonant, it's closed. Okay, let's just simplify. Two consonants, it's open. One consonant, it's closed. I have found this to be pretty consistent in my pronunciation history, which has been extensive. Okay, when it's the last sound in a word, like stylo, which is pen, or gros. So G-R-O-S. S's and T's are silent at the end of those words. Okay, and we'll get to how you know that rule. I promise it's so simple. Let's move on to the letter U, which is pronounced and symbolized by a Y. Okay, and the sound you want to make when you see a U in French, you want to pronounce it with an E in the mouth and oo lips. Okay, so you're going to put E and elongate it, and then you're going to move your lips over the top. So what I have my students do is kind of sing the E and then move the lips as they hold the sound out so they can hear it changing. So we're going to go E, E. So you get both oo and E in the pronunciation. So give that a try. E. You get some of those whistly tones. You access those cool frequencies. So a word like moon, which is lune, lune, which you not leune, please don't J-glide the living H out of everything. Lune, you just want to go right to the position and then hold it, okay? So a lot of people like to do this little J-glide before. My students sometimes struggle with this. They love to do lune, lune, or they do lean, and it's like, no, we gotta have oo lips, lune, lune. So take some time transitioning from a consonant to that position, and I think you'll find it a lot easier. You see the word U-N-E a lot, which means one. In, you have to say the N. You have to do that little Y on the U. In. Okay? You also get a word like P-L-U-S, which means more. So pli, pli. Not pliou, pliou. Please don't say pliou. Pli, pli, pli. All right, let's get right into accents, okay? So accents. We're going to talk about accent aigu,
which we know when the top of it tips to the right or in the direction that you're reading, it's going to close it. So we get an A sound like aigu. Okay, so a couple of words to indicate this are a word like cédille, which is another one of those accents that we're going to talk about. So the cédille has an accent aigu over the top. It's going to close it right up. If it were the opposite direction, which is an accent grave, it would open it. So we get cédille, but that's not a word, okay? So we're not going to do that. Cédille is accent aigu, and then when the top of that little accent falls to the left or in the reverse of the direction you read, it's going to open it. So we get cédille. All right, we're going to go on to the circumflex accent. When it's used, you usually see it over an A, E, I, O, or U. A, you know that we're going to pronounce A the same no matter what. The typeface A is always going to be ah, so when you see a circumflex, don't freak out, just do ah. When you see an E, it's open. You're going to open that up. Open it up like pre and rêve. The circumflex over the top of an E or an O, those are the only two that it changes for our purposes, okay? We're not talking about spoken French, we're talking about sung French. So when you see this little hat over the top of an E or an O, the O, it closes, the E, it opens. So think about words like rêve or tête. You got that little circumflex over the top and it opens it up to that epsilon sound, that open E like head or bed. And if you think about the O, like we talked about bientôt or courte or notre or rôle, you're going to get that nice closed O because there's a circumflex over the top of the O. Everything else stays the same, okay? If you see a circumflex over the top of a U, it's still U. If you see it over the top of an A, a typeface A, it's still going to be A, okay? So don't let it freak you out. If you see that circumflex, it opens an E, closes an O. Okay, let's talk really quick about the accent cédille. Now the cédille is just a little hook or tail added under certain letters. So when you see that little hook underneath the cédille in a word like garçon, that little hook tells us that the C is going to be pronounced differently from how we usually would if it didn't have that. So when you see that C, you're going to pronounce it as an S always. The last major accent in French is going to be the diaresis. The diaresis is different than the umlaut in German, okay? You will see two dots over the top of A's in German. You're going to see them over O's, and it does tell you that the pronunciation is different. If you're doing any kind of performing degree, you're going to run into that. A diaresis is different than an umlaut, okay? An umlaut in German, let me just establish this first, tells you to change the pronunciation. So in a word like house, which is H-A-U-S, house, it would change the ow if you put two dots over the top of the A in German to an oi. It's not like oi, like our oi, like boy. It's slightly rounder. Bäuerlich, bäuerlich. If it didn't have those two dots, that umlaut, it would be bauerlich. So we get ow, oi, ow, oi. So those two dots tell you to change the pronunciation of an AU combination, okay? So if you're looking at two dots over the top of something in French, it's telling you that that letter, whatever the two dots are over the top of, is going to be pronounced separately. So in the name like Thais, if you were looking at this and AI rules would apply, which we'll get to, we haven't got to that combination yet. AI in the middle of a word is usually unless it ends the word, then it's a, okay? So if we were looking at this, we might say te or something like that, because S is not usually pronounced at the end of a French word. It might just be te, but it's not. We have to pronounce the A and the I separate because the I has two little dots. So we're gonna say Thais, and we're gonna treat the I like we would treat any I in French, and we already went over I's. I pronunciations are E, so it would be Thais. So we have to separate those two vowels because you have the two dots over the I. The other thing that's important to know about accents is that they have three uses. The first one is like what we've been talking about. They help you distinguish between how to pronounce the vowel, whether it's open or closed. We already discussed that. And then they distinguish homonyms, okay? And homonyms, which are words spelled alike but have different meanings. So you're gonna look at a word like a in French, which means has, and a with an accent grave, which means to.
Okay, so the different spellings are going to indicate very different meanings. And you're like, well, how do they know which one it is when they speak? I have no idea. Context? It must be. I don't know. And then the third use for the accent marks is to show that over time a word has lost an S. So a word like hôpital, like we would say hospital, right? There should be an S in that word, but it's been lost over time as the language has evolved. So they say hôpital instead of hospital. Okay, we're moving on to nasal vowel sounds. These can be a little bit tricky. Okay, first thing you need to know, when you see A in combination, when it's followed by, more specifically, followed by, always followed by, not preceded by, followed by an N or an M, the nasal consonants, an N or an M, you're going to say ah, but you're going to put it in your nose. If you're having trouble like knowing whether or not it's in your nose, just plug your nose and make it go like this. Now I'm talking in my nose. Now I'm talking out of my nose, but my nose is still plugged. Okay, so you can't do this little trick. You can't do it to see if it's going to go in your nose like that. All right? So A-N and E-N are exactly the same. They are both en. They are both a nasalized A. And the way we indicate that is by putting a little tilde over the top in IPA. Okay, and that tells us that that A-ah sound is going to be in the nose. All right? The next one we're moving on to is when you see in French the spelling I am. So whenever I and M or I and N are combined together and the N and the M follow that I, we're going to say which is basically epsilon, that eh sound in your nose. Okay? So you're going to say eh and then put it in your nose. So if you see a spelling like A-I-M, don't freak out and be like, oh my gosh, what are the A-I rules? No, because you have an M that follows the I. So all you're going to think about is the I, okay, and the M. Don't worry about the rest of the vowels, okay? You have a nasal indicator here because there's an M that follows the I and you're like, oh, okay, that trumps. Now I have to think about that more than what AI means. It's more about what I am means. So a word like F-A-I-M isn't going to be femme, like AI in the middle of a word is usually an open epsilon eh. We're not going to worry about that. We're going to worry more about the I am and ignore the A. So it's going to be fin. So you're going to look for that little trigger, ignore the A, I-N is more important, or a word like P-A-I-N, which means bread. It's going to be, you guessed it, pain, pain. So you're going to get that epsilon nasal, which is eh in your nose, pain. What about E-I-N? It's the same thing. We're just looking at I-N, okay? That E is just coming along for the ride. Forget about it. Doesn't matter. You're going to say for a word like P-L-E-I-N, you're going to say plein. Like, what do I do with the E? Again, ignore it. It's about the I-N combination, okay? You see P-E-I-N-T-R-E, and you're like, E-I, what do I do? An N follows the I, so let's just look for that combination. Don't be distracted by that little E who's like, I want to play too. No, she don't get to play, okay? Send her home. She does not get to play in this. You're just going to think about that I-N. So P-L or P-I, P-E-I-N-T-R-E is going to be pâtre, 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 which comes to a very important rule, okay? When it's nasalized, that N is not pronounced. Don't do it. Don't do it, or I will get you. Don't say pantre, pantre, pantre. Don't do it ever. Pantre, go right to the T. Just do the nasal, pantre, and then go right to the T, okay? Like I said, don't do it. Don't do it or I will get you. If you have a word like S-I-M-P-L-E, in American we say simple. I-M is a. That means that N goes away. You don't pronounce the M. All it does is indicate to us how we're supposed to pronounce that I, which is simple. Simple. Okay, the other one would be something like impossible. It's the I-N combination and you do un. But you don't say the N. You don't say impossible. You say impossible. Impossible. There are rules that will tell us when we pronounce that. And it's as simple as whether or not the M is followed by another vowel or whether there are two of them. Okay? So we'll get to that. On to O nasal. If you see an O followed by an M or an N, it's going to be on. So something like nombre. Don't say the M. Don't you do it. Nombre. Nombre, which means number. And then something like mon. You're going to have mon. Not mon. Don't put it in your nose and then say the N. Mon. And the fourth is like the vowel in the English learn, but you're going to put it in your nose. So think like earth, and then put it in your nose. So something like one, like un, deux, trois. It's just simple, just like grunt it out. Or something like perfume, which you see on a lot of bottles, ladies, P-A-R-F-U-M. That U-M you have to nasalize because the U is followed by an M. And it's not a double M, and the M is not followed by an E. It's just that pairing. You're gonna say parfum. Okay, those are the nasals. Congratulations, we've got through so much French, and I talked